Hello guys, my name is Dixita, and today gives I some information from the psychology of money book. And this chapter is 11th. Is reasonable rational? This podcast is aiming to be mostly reasonable works better than trying to be coldly rational. You are not a spreadsheet. You are not a spreadsheet. You are a person, a screwed up, emotional person. It took me a while to figure it out, but once it clicked, I realized it's one of the most important parts of finance. With it comes something that often goes overlooked. Do not aim to be coldly rational when making financial decisions. Aim to just be pretty reasonable. Reasonable is more realistic and you have a better chance of sticking with it for the long run, which what matters most when managing money. To show you what I mean, let me tell you the story of a guy who tried to cure syphilis with malaria. Julius Wagner Georges was a 19th century psychiatrist with two unique skills. He was good at recognizing patterns and what others saw as crazy found merely bold. His specialty was patients with serous neurosyphilis, then a fatal diagnosis with no known treatment. He began noticing a pattern. Syphilis patients tended to recover if they to had the added misfortune fortune of having prolonged favors from un, in unrelated elements. Wagner judges assumed this was due to a hunch that had been around for centuries, but doctors didn't understand well. Favors play a role in helping the today body fight infection. So he jumped to the logical conclusion. In the early 19th, Wagner judges began injecting patients with low and strain of thyroid, typhoid, malaria, and smallpox to trigger fevers strong enough to kill off their syphilis. This was as dangerous as it sounds. Some of his patients died from the treatment. He eventually settled on a weak version of malaria since it could be effectively countered with wines after a few days of retaining fevers. After some tragic trial and error in its experience, Wagner judges reported that 6 in 10 syphilis patients treated with malaria therapy recovered compared to around 3 in 2 patients left alone. He won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1927. The organization today notes the main work that concerned Wagner judges throughout his working life was the endeavor to cure mental disease by inducing a fever. Penicillin eventually made melotherapy for syphilis patients obsolete. Thank goodness. But Wagner Georges is one of the only doctors in history who not only recognized fever's role in fighting infection but also prescribed it as a treatment. Fevers have always been as feared as they are mysterious ancient. Romans worshipped Febris, the goddess who protected people from fevers. Amulets were left at to placate her, hoping to stave off the next round of shivers. But Wagner Judge was onto something. Fevers are not accidental nuisance. They do play a role in the body roads to no recovery. We now have better and more scientific evidence of fevers usefulness in fighting infections. A 1 degree increase in body temperature has been shown to slow the replication rate of some viruses by a factor of 200. Numerous investigators have identified a better outcome among patients who displayed fever. One NIH paper writes, the Seattle Children's Hospital includes a section on its website to educate parents who may panic at this dilated rise in their child's temperature. Fever turn on the body's immune system. They help the body fight infection. Normal fevers between 100 Celsius and 104 Celsius fever are good for sick children. But that's where the science ends. The reality takes over. Fever is almost universal seen as a bad thing. They are treated with drugs like Trilon to reduce them as quickly as they appear. appear. Despite millions of years of evaluation as a defense mechanism, no parents, no patients, few doctors, and certainly no drug company view fever as anything but a misfortune that should be eliminated. This view do not match the no science. One study was blunt. Treatment of fever is common in the ICU setting and likely related to standard dogma rather than evidence-based practices. Harvard Markle, director of the Center for the History of Medicine, once said of fever phobia, these are cultural practices that spread just as widely as the infectious infectious disease that are behind them. Why does this happen? If fevers are beneficial, why do we fight them too so universally? I don't think it's complicated. Fevers hurt and people don't want to hurt. That's it. A doctor's goal is not just to cure disease, it's to cure disease within the confines of what's reasonable and tolerable to the patient. Fevers can have marginal benefits in fighting infections, but they hurt. And I go to the doctor to stop hurting. I don't care about double-blind studies when I am shivering under a blanket. If you have a pill that can make a fever stop, give it to me now. You have a pill that can make a fever stop, give it to me now. It may be rational to want a fever if you have an infection, but it's not reasonable. That philosophy aiming to be reasonable instead of rational is one more people should consider when making decisions with their money. Academic finance is devoted to finding the mathematically optimal investment strategies. My own theory is that in the real world, people do not want the mathematically optimal strategy. They want the strategy that maximizes for how well they sleep at night. Harry Markowitz won the Nobel Prize for exploring the mathematical trade-off between risk and return. He was once asked how he invested his own money and described his portfolio allocation in the 1950s. When his models were first developed, I visualized my grief if the stock market went way up and I wasn't in it, or if it went way down and I was completely in it. My intention was to minimize my future regret, so I split my contributions 50-50, 50 by 50 between bonds and equities. Michael Zaire eventually changed his investment strategy, diversifying the mix, but two things here are important. One is that minimize future regret is hard to rationalized on paper but easy to justify in real life. A rational investor makes decisions based on numeric facts. A reasonable investor makes them in a conference room surrounded by co-workers you would want to think highly of you, with a spouses you don't want to let down, or judge against the silly but realistic competition that, that are that's often ignored when viewed enough a strictly financial lens. The second is that TVS is fine. Jason Chimney, who conducted the interview when Markovia described how he invested, later reflected. My one view is that people are neither rational nor irrational. We are human. We don't like to think harder than we need to, and we have unceasing demands on our attention. Seen in that light, there's nothing surprising about the facts that the pinner of modern portfolio theory built his initial portfolio with so little regard for his own research. Nor is it surprising that he adjusted it later. Markowitz is neither rational or irrational. He is reasonable. What's often overlooked in finance is that something can be technically true but contextually nonsense. In 2008, a pair of researchers from Yale published a study arguing young savers should supercharge their retirement account using 2 to 1 margin when buying stocks. It suggests that investors taper debt leverages as they age, which lets a saver take more risk when they are young and can handle a magnified market rollercoaster and less when they are older. Even if using leverage is left you wiped out when you were young, the researchers showed savers would still be better off in the long run so long as they picked themselves back up, followed the plan and kept saving in a 2 to 1 leverages account the day after being wiped out. The math works on paper. It's rational strategy, but it's almost absurdly unreasonable. No normal person could watch 100% of their retirement account evaporate and be so unfazed that they carry on with the strategy undertone terror. They did white look for a different option and perhaps sue their financial advisor. The researcher argued that when using their strategy, the expected retirement wealth is 90% higher compared to life cycle funds. It is also 100% less reasonable. There is in fact a rational reason to favor. There is in fact a rational reason to favor them. What look like irrational decisions? Here's one. Let me suggest that you love your investment. This is not traditional advice. It's almost a badge of honor for investors to claim that's emotionless about their investment because it seems rational. But if lacking emotions about your strategy or the stocks you want, increasing the odds you will walk away from them when they become difficult. What look like rational thinking becomes a liability. The reasonable investors who love their technically imperfect strategies have an edge because they are more likely to stick with those strategies with. There are few financial variables more correlated to performance than commitment to a strategy during its years. Both the amount of performance and the odds of capturing it over a given period of time. The historical odds of making money is US. Markets are 50 by 50 over 1 day periods, 68% in 1 year periods, 88% in 10-year periods and 100% in 20-year periods. Anything that keeps you in the game is a quantifiable advantages. If you view do what you love as a guide to a happier life, it sounds like empty fortune cookie advice. If you view it as the thing providing the endurance necessary to put the quantifiable odds of success in your favor, you realize it should be the most important part of any financial strategy. Invest in a promising company you don't care about, and you might enjoy it when everything's going well. But when the side eventually turns, you are suddenly losing money on something you are not interested in. It's double burden, and the part of least resistance is it to move on to something else. If you are passionate about the company to begin with, you love the mission, the product, the team, the science, whatever the inevitable down times when you are losing money or the company needs help are blatant by the fact that at least you feel like you are part of something meaningful. That can be the necessary motivation that prevents you from giving up and moving on. There are several other times when it's fine to be reasonable instead of rational with money. There's well documented home biases where people prefer to invest in companies from the country they live in while ignoring ignoring the other 95% plus of the planet. It's not rational until you consider that investing is effectively giving money to strangers. If familiars help you take the leap of faith required to remain being those strangers, it's reasonable. Day trading and picking individual stocks is not rational for most investors. The odds are heavily against your success, but they are both reasonable in small amounts if they scratches and itch hard enough to leave the rest of your more diversified investment alone. Investor Josh Brown, who advocates and mostly on diversified funds, once explained why he also owns a smarting of individual stocks. I am not buying individual stocks because I think I am going to generate alpha. I just love stocks and have ever since I was 20 years old, and it's my money. I get to do whatever. Quite reasonable. Most forecast about where the economy and the stock market are heading next are terrible. But marketing making making forecast is reasonable. It's hard to wake up in the morning telling yourself you have no clue what the fortune holds, even if it's true. Acting on investment forecast is dangerous, but I get why people try to predict what will happen next year. It's human nature. It's reasonable. Jack Bogle, the late founder of Vanguard, spent his career on a casual to promote low-cost passive index investing. Many tough it investing that his son found a career as an active. Jack Bogle, the late founder of Vanguard, spent his his career on a crash course to promote low-cost passive index investing. Many thought it interesting that his son found a career as an active high-fee hedge fund and mutual fund manager. Bogle, the man who said high-fee funds violate the humble rule of arithmetic, invested some of his own money in his son's funds. What's the explanation? We do some things for family reasons, Bogle told the Wall Street Journal. If it's not consistent, well, life isn't always consistent. Indeed, it really is. Today's next chapter is 12th Surprise. This portage's history is the study of change, ironically used as a map of the future. Stanford professor Scott Sagan once said something everyone who follows the economy or investment markets should have on their wall. Things that have never happened before happen all the time. History is mostly the study of surprising events, but it is often used by investors and economists as an unusable guide to be the future. Do you see the irony? Do you see the problem? It is smart to have a deep appreciation for economy and investing history. History has as celebrate over expectation. Study where people tend to go wrong and offer a rough guide of what tends to work. But it is not in any way a map of the future. A trap manifestation fall into is what I call historian is prophets, fallacy, and over-reliance on past data is the signal to future conditions in a field where innovation and change are the lifeblood of progress. You can't blame investor for doing this if you view investing as a hard science. History should be a perfect guide to the future. Geologists can look at a billion years of historical data and forms model of how the earth behaves. So can methodologists and doctors kidney operate the same way in 2020 as they did in 1020. But investing is not a hard science. It's massive group of people making imperfect decisions with limited information. About things that will have a massive impact on their well-being, well-being, which can make even smart people nervous, greedy, and paranoid. Richard Feynman, the great psychiatric physicist, physicist, once said, "Imagine how much harder physics would be if electrons had feeling. Well, investors have feeling, quite a few of them. That's why it's hard to predict what they will do next based solely on what they did in the past. The cornerstone of economics is that things change over time because the invisible hand has anything staying too good or too bad indefinitely. Investor Bill Warner once described how Mr. Markets works. He's got a capitalism at work T-shirt on and a sledgehammer in his hand. Few things stay the same for very long, which means we can't treat historian as perhaps the most important driver of anything tied to money is the stories people tell themselves and the preferences there. The most important drivers of anything tied to money is the stories people tell themselves and the preferences they have for goods and services. Those things don't tend to stay still. They changes with culture and generations. They are always changing and always will. The mental trick we play on ourselves here is an over admiration of people who have been there, done that. When it comes to money, experiencing specific events does not necessarily qualify you to know what will happen next. In fact, it really does because experience leads to overconfidence more than forecasting ability. Investor Michael Botanic once explained this well, confronted with the argument that few investors are prepared for rising interest rate because they are never experienced them. The last big period of rising interest rates occurred almost 40 years ago. He argued that it didn't matter because experiencing or even studying what happened in the past might not serve as any guide to what will happen when rates rise in the future. So what? Will the current rate hike look like the last one or the one before that? Will different asset classes behave similarly the same or the exact opposite? One on the one hand, people that have been investing through the events of 1987, 2000, and 2008 have experienced a lot of different markets. On the other hand, isn't it possible that this experience can lead to overconfidence, falling to admit you are wrong, anchoring to previous outcomes? Two dangerous things happen when you relate too heavily on investment history as a guide to what's going to happen next. First, you will like miss you will likely miss the outlier events that move the needle the most. The most important events in historical data are the big outliners, the record-breaking events. They are what move the needle in the economy and the stock markets. The Great Depressions, the Great Depression's World War II, the dot-com bubble, September 11th, the housing crash of the mid 2000s. A handful of outlier events play an enormous role because they influence so many unrelated events in their wake. 15 billion people were born in the 19th and 20th centuries, but try to imagine how different the global economy and the whole world would be today if just seven of them never existed. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Thomas Edison, Bill Gates, Luther King. I am not even sure that's the most meaningful list, but almost everything about the world today, from border to technology to social norms, would be different if these seven people hadn't left their mark. Another way to put this is that 0.00000000004% of people were responsible for perhaps the majority of the world's direction over the last century. The same goes for projects, innovations, and events. Imagine the last century without the Great Depression, World War II, the Manhattan Project, vacancies, antibiotics, ARPANET, Advent, September 11th, the fall of the Soviet Union. How many projects and events occurred in the 20th century? Billions, trillions, who knows? But those eight alone impacted the world orders upon orders of a magnitude more than others. The things that makes tail even events easy to appreciate is how easy it is to underestimate how things compound. How, for example, 9 by 11 formed the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates, which helped drive the housing bubble, which led to the financial crisis, which led to a poor jobs market, which led tens of millions to seek a college education, which leads to a $1.6 trillion taking action that fully exploit an accurate view of the future coming true. But room for error is depreciated, and misunderstood. It's often viewed as a conservative hedge used by those who don't want to take much risk or aren't confident in their views. But when used appropriately, it's quite the opposite. Room for error lets you endure a range of potential outcomes, and endurance lets you stick around long enough to let the odds of benefiting from a low probability outcomes fall in your favor. The biggest gains occur infrequently, either because they don't happen often or because they take time to compound. So the person with enough room for error in part of their strategy to let them endure hardship in another has an edge over the person who gets wiped out. Game over, insert more takens when there's wrong. Bill Gates understood this well. When Microsoft was a young company, he said he came up with this incredibly conservative approach that I want to have enough money in the bank to pay a year's worth of payroll, even if we didn't get any payments coming in. Warren Buffett expressed a similar idea when he told Berkshire Hathaway shareholders in 2008, I have pledged to you, the rating agencies and myself, to always run Berkshire with more than ample cash. When forced to choose, I will not trade even a night's sleep for the chance of extra profits. There are a few specific places for investors to think about room for error. Once volatility. Can you survive your assets decline by 30% on a spreadsheet? Maybe yes. In terms of actually paying your bills and saying cash flows positive. But what about mentally? It is easy to underestimate what a 30% decline does to your physics. Your confidence may become shot at the very moment opportunity is at its highest. You or your spouse may decide it's time for a new plan or new career. I know several investors who quit after losses because they were exhausted. Physically exhausted spreadsheets are good at telling you when the numbers do or don't add up. Theirs are not good at modeling how you will feel when you tuck your kids in at night, wondering if the investment decision you have made were a mistake that will hurt their future. Having a gap between what you can technically endure versus what's emotionally possible is an overlooked vision of room of error. Another is saving for retirement. We can look at history and see, for example, that the US stock market has returned an annual average of 6.8% after inflation since the 1870s. It's reasonable first approximations to use that as an estimate of what to expect on your own diversified portfolio when saving for retirement. You can use those return assumptions to back into the amount of money you will need to save each month to achieve your target stage. But what if future returns are lower? Or what if long-term history is a good estimate of the long-term future, but your target retirement date ends up falling in the middle of a brutal bear market like 2009? What if a future bear market scares you out of stocks and you end up missing a future bull market? So the returns you actually earn are less than the market averages. What if you need to cash out your retirement accounts in your 30s to pay off for medical mishaps? The answer to those what ifs it is you won't be able to retire like you once predicted, which can be disaster. The solution is simple. Use room for error when estimating your future returns. This is more art than science. For my own investment, which I will describe more in chapter 20, I assume the future returns I will earn in my lifetime will be one third lower than the historic averages. So I save more than I would if I assumed the future will resemble the past. It's my margin of safety. The future may be worse than one third lower than the past, but no margin of safety offers a 100% guarantee. A one third buffer is enough to allow me to sleep well at night, and if the future does resemble the past, I will be pleasantly surprised. The best way to achieve facility is to aim loud, says Charlie Munger. Wonderful. Thank you. Which led to 1.6 trillion in trillion in student loans with a 10.8% defi- defer- default rate. It's not initiative to link 19 hijackers to the current weights of student loans, but that's what happened in a world driven by a few outlier tail events. The majority of what's happening at any given moment in the global economy can be tied back to a handful of past events that were nearly impossible to predict. The most common plot of economic history is the role of surprise. The reason surprise occurs is not because our models are wrong or our intelligence is low. It's because the odds that Hitler's parents argued on the evening 9 months before he was born were the same as them convincing was born were the same as them conceiving a child. Technology is hard to predict because Bill Gates may have died from polio if John Salk got cranky and gave up on his quest to find a vaccine. The reason we couldn't predict the students' loan growth is because an airport security guard may have confiscated a hijacker's knife on 9 by 11th. That's all there is to it. The problem is that we often use events like the Great Depressions and World War II to guide our views of things, like worst case scenarios when thinking about future investment returns. But those record setting events had no precedent when they occurred, so the forecaster who assumed the worst. Events of the past will match the worst. Events of the future is not following history. They are accidentally assuming that the history of unpredictable, precedented events doesn't apply to the future. Nassim Taleb writes in his book, Fooled by Randomness, the in pharaonic Egypt, scribes track the higher water mark of the Nile and use it as an estimate for a future worst case scenarios. The same can be seen in the Fukushima nuclear reactors, which experienced a catastrophic failure in 2011 when a tsunami struck. It had been built to withstand the worst past historical earthquake, with the builders not imagining much worse and not thinking that the worst past events had to be a surprise as it had no precedent. This is not a failure of analysis, it's failure of imagination. Realizing the future might not look anything like the past is a special kinds of skill that is not generally looked highly upon by the financial forecasting community. At a 2017 dinner I attended in New York, Daniel Kahneman was asked how investors should respond when you when our forecasts are wrong. He said, whenever we are surprised by something, even if we admit it, we made a mistake. We say, oh, I will never make that mistake again. But in fact, what you should learn when you make a mistake because you did not anticipate something is that the world is difficult to anticipate. That's the correct lesson to learn from surprises. That the world is surprising. The correct lesson to learn from surprises is that the world is surprising. Not that we should use past surprises as a guide to future boundaries, that we should use past surprises as an admission that we have no idea what might happen next. The most important economic events of the future, things that will move the needle the most are things that have history gives us little to no guide about. They will be unprecedented events. Their unprecedented nature means we want to be prepared for them, which is part of what makes them so impactful. This is true for both scary events like recessions and wars and great events like innovations. I am confident in that precedence. predictions because surprises. Moving the needle the most is the one forecast that's been accurate at virtually every point in history. Second is history can be a misleading guide to the future of the economy and stock market because it doesn't account for structural changes that are relevant to today's world. Consider a few weeks, big ones. The 401,000 is 42 years old. The Roth IRA is younger, created in the 1990s, so personal. Financial advice and analysis about how Americans save for retirement today is not directly comparable to what made sense just a generation ago. We have new options, things change. Or take venture capital. It barely existed 25 years ago. There are single venture capital funds today that are larger than the entire industry was a generation ago. In his memory, Nike founder Phil Knight wrote about his early days in business. There was no such thing as venture capital. An aspiring young entrepreneur had very few places to turn, and those places were all guarded by risk-average gatekeepers with zero imagination, in other words, bankers. What this means? In effect, is that all historical data going back just a few decades about how startups are financed is out of date. What we know about investment cycles and startup failure rates is not a deep basis of history to learn from. Because the way companies are founded, there is such a new historical paradigm or track public markets. The S&P 500 did not include financial stock until 1976. Today, financial make up 16% of the index. Technology stocks were virtually non-existent 50 years ago. Today, they are more than a 50th of the index. Accounting rules have changed over time. So have disclosure, auditing, and the movement of market liquidity. Things change. The tendency between US recession has changed dramatically over the last 150 years. The average time between recession has grown from about 2 years in the late 18th to 5 years in the early 20th century to 8 years over the last half century. Is I right? This it looks like we are going into recession. Failure since the last recession began in December 2007. That's the longest gap between recessions since before the Civil War. There are plenty of theories on why recessions have become less frequent. One in that the Fed is better at managing the business cycle, or at least extending it. Another is that heavy industry is more prone to boom and bust overproduction than the service industries that dominated the last 50 years. The pessimistic view is that we now have few, fewer recessions, but when they occur, they are more powerful than before. For our argument, it doesn't particularly matter what caused the change. What matters is that things clearly change to show how this historic changes should affect investing decisions. Consider the work of a man many believe to be one of the greatest investment minds of all time, Benjamin Graham. Graham's classic book, The Intelligent Investors, is more than theories. It gives practical direction like formulas investors can use to make smart investing decisions. I read Graham book when I was a teenager. I learning about investing for the first time. The formulas presented in the book were appealing to me because they were literally step-by-step instruction on how to get rich. Just follow the instruction. It seemed to is so easy. But something becomes clear. When you try applying some of these formulas, few of them actually work. Graham advocated for chasing stock trading for less than their networking asset basically cash in the bank minus all debts. This sounds great, but few stocks actually traded cheaply. Anyone other than say a penny stock accused of accounting fraud. One of Graham's criteria instruct conservative investors to avoid stock trading for more than 1.5 times book value. If you follow this rule over the last decades, would you would have owned almost nothing but insurance and bank stocks. There is no world where tax is okay. The Intelligent Investor is one of the greatest investing books of all time, but I don't know a single investor who has done well implementing Graham published formulas. The book is full of wisdom, perhaps more than any other investment book ever published, but is a how-to guide. It's questionable at best. What happened? Was Graham a showman who sounded good, but whose advice didn't work? Not at all. He was a widely successful investor himself, but he was practical, and he was a true contrarian. He wasn't so wedded to investing ideas, just he had he had stick with them when many other investors caught onto those theories, making them so popular as to render their potential useless. Jason Waking, who annotated a later version of Graham's book, once wrote, Graham was constantly experimenting and testing his assumptions and seeking out what works, not what worked yesterday, but what works today. In its revised editions of The Intelligence Investor, Graham discarded the formulas he presented in the previous edition and replaced them with new ones, declaring in a sense that those do not work anymore, or they do not work as well as they used to. These are the formulas that seems to work better now. One of the common criticisms made of Graham is that all the formulas in the 1972 edition are antiquated. The only proper response to this criticism is to say, of course, they are, they are, they are the ones is he used to replace the formulas in the 1965 editions, which replaced the formulas in the 1954 edition, which in turn replaced the ones from the 1949 edition, which were used to augment the original formulas that were presented in security analysis in 1934. Graham died in 1976. If the formulas he advocated were discarded and updated 5 times between 1934 and 1972, how relevant do you think they are in 2020 or will be in 2015? Just before he died, Graham was asked whether detailed analysis of individual stocks a tactic he became famous for remain a strategy he favored. He answered, in general, no, I am no longer an advocate of elaborate techniques of security analysis in order to find superior values opportunity. This was a rewarding activity, say 40 years ago, when our textbook was first published, but the situation has changed a great deal since then. What changed was competition grew was as opportunities became well known, technology made information more accessible, and industry changes the economy shift from industrial to technology sector, which have different business cycle and capital uses. Things change. An interesting trick of investing history is that the further back you look, the more likely you are to be examining a world that no longer applies to today. Many investors and economists take comfort in knowing that forecasts are backed up by decades, even centuries of data. But since economies evolve, Recent history is often the best guide to the future because it's more likely to include important conditions that are relevant to the futures. There's common phrase in investing, usually used mockingly, that it's different this time. If you need to rebut someone who's predicting the future won't perfectly mirror the past, say, oh, so you think it's different this time, and drop the mic. It comes from investor John Templeton viewed that the four most dangerous words in investing are it's different this time. Templeton thought admitted that it is different at least 20% of the time. The world changes, of course, it does, and those changes were what matters most over time. Michael Batnick put it the 12 most dangerous words in investing are. The four most dangerous words in investing are it's different this time. This doesn't mean we should ignore history when thinking about money, but there's an important nuisance. If you further back in history you look, the more gentle you take away should be. Gentle things like people relationship to greed and fear, how they behave under stress, and how they respond to incentives tends to be stable in time. The history of money is useful for that kinds of stuff, but specific trends, traits, specific sectors, specific casual relationship about markets and what people should do with their money are always an example of evaluation in progress. Historians are not prophets. The question then the question then is how should we think about and plan for the future? Let's take a look in the next chapter. Today's next chapter is 13. Is room for error. This quotas is the most important part of every plan is planning on your plan, not going according to plan. Some of the best examples of smart financial behavior can be found in an unlikely place, Las Vegas casinos, not among all players, of course, but a tiny group of blackjack players who practice card counting can teach ordinary people something extraordinarily important about managing money, the importance of room for error. The fundamentals of blackjack's card counting are simple. No one can know with certainty what card the dealer will draw next. Second, but by tracking what cards have already been dealt, you can calculate what cards remain in the deck. Doing so can tell you the odds of a particular card being drawn by the dealer. As a player, you bet more when the odds of getting a card you want are in your favor and less when they are against you. The machines of how this is done don't matter here. What matters is that a blackjack card counter knows they are playing a game of odds, not certains. In any particular hand, they think they have a good chance of being right, but no, there's a decent chance they are wrong. It might sound strange given their professions, but their strategy relies entirely on humility. Humility that they don't know and cannot know exactly what's going to happen next. So play their hand accordingly. The card counting system works because it tilts the odds ever so slightly from the house to the player, but bet too heavily even when the odds seems in your favor. And if you're wrong, you might lose so much that you don't have enough money to keep playing. There is never a moment when you are so right that you can bet chip in front of you. The world isn't that kind to anyone not consistently anyway. Anyways, you have to give yourself room for error. You have to plan on your plan, not going according to plan. Kevin Lewis, a successful card counter portrayed in the book Bringing Down the House, wrote more about this philosophy. Although card counting is statistically proven to work, it does not guarantee you will win every hand, let alone every trip you make to the casino. We must make sure that we have enough money to withstand any swings of bad luck. Let's assume you have roughly a 2% edge over the casino. That still means the casino will win 49% of the time. Therefore, you need to have enough money to withstand any variant swings against you. A rule of thumb is that you should have at least a 100 basis unit. Assuming you start with $10,000, you could comfortably play $100 unit. History littered with good ideas taken too far, which are indistinguishable from bad ideas. The wisdom in having room for error is acknowledging that uncertainty, randomness, and chance unknowns aren't ever for a present part of life. The only way to deal with them is by increasing the gap between what you think will happen and what can happen, while still leaving you capable of fighting another day. Benjamin Graham is known for his concept of margin of safety. He wrote about it extensively and in mathematical details. But my favorite summary of the theory came when he mentioned in an interview that the purpose of the margin of safety is to render the forecast unnecessary. It's hard to overstate how much power lies in that simple statement. Margin of safety, you can also call it room for error too. Redundancy, redundancy is the only effective way to safely navigate a world that is governed by odds, not certainties. And almost everything related to money exists in that kind of world. Forecasting with precision is hard. This is obvious to the card counter because no one could possibly know where a particular card lies in a shuffled deck. It's less obvious to someone asking what will the average annual return of the stock market be over the next 10 years, or on what date will I be able to retire, but they are frequently the same. The best we can do is think about odds. Graham margin of safety is a simple suggestion that we don't need to view the world in front of us as black or white, predictable or a crapshoot. The gray area, pursuing things where a range of potential outcomes are acceptable, is the smart way to proceed. But people underestimated the need for room for error in almost everything they do not see that involves money. Stock analysis give their clients price targets, not price ranges. Economic forecasters predict things with precise figures. Daily, broad probabilities. The pundit who speaks in unshakable certainties will gain a larger following than the one who says we can't know for sure and speaks in probabilities. We do this in all kinds of financial endeavors, especially those related to our own decisions. Harvard psychologist Max Bejarin once we do this in all kinds of financial endeavors, especially those related to our own decisions. Harvard psychologist Max Benjamin once showed that when people analyzing other people's home renovations plans, most people estimate the project will run between 25% and 50% over budgets. But when it comes to their own projects, people estimate that renovations will be completed on time and at budget. Oh, the eventually disappointment. Two things cause us to avoid room for error. One is the idea that somebody must know what the future holds, driven by the uncomfortable feelings that comes from admitting the opposite. The second is that you are therefore doing yourself.